In our final project, we have distortion in two different directions. It's kind of waving across and also waving up and down as well. If I speed this up, you'll kind of see this in action. Now there is more distortion in the X direction than the Y direction, so we do want two different numbers going on here. So what we need to do is not just add distortion, which is what we did in the last project. We're going to add distortion X and a distortion Y into our code. So what we're going to do is, before we start doing the source and the destination of our images, we're also going to add in a constant called distortion X. Now previously what we did with distortion was just make it frame count to see if it works. So let's just keep it as that for now. We're also just going to add this to SX. So we're going to add distortion X. We'll come back and add distortion Y and things in a little bit. So at the moment, this is just moving across the page. And similar to what we did in the last project, we want to add some kind of wave to this. So to add a wave to this, what we're going to do is put sign around this. So we're going to add sin or sign with some brackets around the frame count. I'm just going to open this up to make it a little bit easier to read. So I've just added this in and added this plus in as well. Now remember that sign just goes between -1 and +1. So at the moment we'll just get this kind of shaky motion. It doesn't look too good. It kind of feels a bit too quick as well. Let's slow that down. Now what I'm going to do is actually slow this down in another constant called wave. How quick is this wave? So I'm going to make this equal to something like, well, let's just make it 0.05. So that's kind of what we added in the last project. Kind of worked pretty well. Let's keep it the same. So instead of this frame count being times 0.05, we're just going to use wave instead. So the wave is just going to come from here into here. So this just slows down the wave's amplitude. So let's have a look at this now. Again, if I just put my cursor here, you can start to see a little bit of movement. It's very, very subtle. The reason it's subtle is because it just goes between -1 and +1. So we need to kind of increase this a little bit more. So to increase this just a little bit more, what we're going to do is times all of that by 10. So now it's going to go between +10 and -10. So now we'll get this kind of movement going on. Now, just like on the last project, what we can do is use the X and Y from up above to kind of start playing around with this a little bit more. So within my sine wave, I'm also going to add in plus X. Let's see how that looks. Let's see if this makes any difference. So now we'll see some movement in the X direction. And that looks pretty good. And again, we might want to kind of split this up by adding some Y direction in here as well. Maybe we kind of want to play around with this a little bit more. Maybe this is too much, maybe it's too little. So there's a few things that we can actually start to play with. Maybe I want to times that number by something like 0.5. So this just slows it down a little bit more. Now what we want to do is maybe add some more based on the Y direction too. So again, I'm just going to do plus the Y direction times 0.1. So I've got a few things in here. This is the global one, this is X, and this is Y. And the max and min it can go to is plus and minus 10. So now what we get is something that looks like this. Again, it is subtle. Maybe I want to kind of increase the Y value to kind of separate it out a bit more. Maybe 0.3 in here. There we go. We can see it kind of being in two different directions now. Now you might notice as well, similar to the last project, what we have is this just moving in one direction. How do we move it in two? Well, at the moment, I've only got my distortion, of course, on the X direction. Let's add one for the Y direction. It could be different numbers completely. So underneath here, I'm going to add in a distortion Y. And this is going to look pretty much the same as before. What we're going to do is something like sine frame count. We'll come in to add more of this a little bit later. So what we'll do, we'll start by adding this to SY. We'll plus this distortion in the Y direction too. So at the moment, what we'll get is a little bit of up and down just because it's between 1 and -1. So we'll see there, it kind of jumps up and down pretty quickly. Might give you a little bit of a headache. So let's slow that down by timesing it by wave. So now, just going to multiply that by wave. So now what we'll see is this, again, kind of waves up and down very slowly by 1 plus and -1. So we might want to increase that a little bit more. So let's times this, not by 10, but maybe just by 5, just so we've got different things in different directions. So now we'll see this kind of globally wave up and down. What we might want to do is start adding more values in here and play around with some of this stuff. So just like we have up here, I might want to change some of this stuff too. Maybe I'll just try similar for now, times 0.5 and plus y times, maybe we'll change that to 0.1 just to play around with some of the numbers in here. So let's see how that looks. So we have this kind of like wave type approach going on in two different directions. And again, I can start playing around with some of the numbers in here as well. So maybe what I want to do is say this is bigger, maybe this is just 1 in here, maybe this is actually 0.1 instead. So I'm just kind of like messing around with the numbers and starting to see what works. And there we go, we're starting to get more of this wave. So how do we make something that looks a little bit more like this, where we have this kind of like very defined movement? Well, of course, at the moment, we've got very big tiles. Let's reduce that a little bit more. Let's make the tile sizes smaller and the amount of tiles that we have larger. So up further on the page, our tile size, we're going to make 10, but we're going to make more tiles in different directions. So I've added this times this times this. So what we've got is now we have something that looks a little bit more like that.